Hello there and welcome. Sometimes you see a news story that just looks, well, complicated. Today, we're going to take one of those stories, break it down together, and learn some really useful English vocabulary along the way. Okay, so let's start with the headline that got this whole thing started. It says, Iran steps up attacks on Israel Gulf energy sites. Now, if you look at this and feel a little overwhelmed, believe me, that is totally okay. News headlines use their own special kind of English, and they can be tricky. If that sounds familiar, then you are absolutely in the right place. Our whole goal today is to make this story feel much clearer. By the end of our time together, you're going to feel a lot more confident reading and listening to the news in English. So, what's our game plan? First, we'll get a handle on who is involved in this complex situation. Then, we'll look at what's being said, what we're calling Iran's defiant stance. After that, we'll zoom in on the specific attacks happening in the region and talk about the very real human cost. And of course, we'll wrap up by reviewing all the new vocabulary we learned. Ready? Let's dive in. First things first, let's get a clear picture of who the main players are. The story is focused on Iran and its actions towards Israel, but it also pulls in several of Iran's neighbors there in the Persian Gulf. We're talking about Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. Just knowing who's involved is a huge first step to making sense of everything. All right, so now we know who is on the stage. Let's look at what they're saying. In news reports, the specific words that officials use are so important. They give us huge clues about their attitude and their position. So let's break down some quotes. Okay, let's look at this first quote together. I'm going to read it slowly. Iran defiantly insisted. Let's pause on that first word, defiantly. What kind of feeling does that word give you? Just think about it for a second. So defiantly means doing something in a way that shows you are openly refusing to back down or obey. It's a very strong word. So when the news says Iran defiantly insisted, it's telling us that they are making their position crystal clear and they are not changing it, even if there's pressure to do so. Now here's another key quote, this one from an Iranian general. He says, "There is no particular problem in stockpiling." Let's zoom in on that word stockpiling. You'll hear this one a lot in the news, and not just about military stuff either. So what does stockpiling mean? It's simply the act of collecting and keeping a big supply of something because you think you'll need it later. Like how people might stockpile food and water before a big storm. In this case, of course, the general is talking about building up a large collection of missiles. Okay, so we've heard the official statements. Now let's switch gears and look at the actual events being reported. What is physically happening on the ground according to the news? This table really helps us see what's going on at a glance. So in Kuwait, an oil refinery was targeted by drones, which started a fire. Over in Bahrain, a warehouse was set on fire. In Saudi Arabia, they managed to shoot down some drones that were headed for an oil-rich area. And finally, in Jerusalem, explosions were heard after people got warnings about incoming missiles. The report mentioned an attack on an oil refinery. So what exactly is a refinery? Well, think of it as a huge factory where a raw material, like crude oil, gets processed and purified. It's where oil gets turned into things we use every day, like gasoline. You can probably imagine that attacking a refinery is a pretty big deal. In the stories about Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, the report says the drones were intercepted. To intercept something just means to stop it from getting to its destination. A great way to think about it is like a soccer goalie who intercepts the ball, stopping it from going into the net. In this case, the military is acting like the goalie. But here's the thing, even when a missile or drone is intercepted, the danger isn't always completely gone. The report mentions that shrapnel from an intercepted projectile hit a warehouse. Shrapnel is the word for all those small, sharp, jagged pieces of metal that fly out from an explosion. And those pieces can obviously still cause a lot of damage. All right, now we need to talk about what is, without a doubt, the most serious part of this story. Because behind all the military actions and the political statements, these events have a real and often tragic human cost. Let's look at how people are being affected. The news source states that over 1,300 people have been killed in Iran. It's a sobering number that really reminds us of the terrible cost of conflict. And the impact ripples outward. The report says that in neighboring Lebanon, more than 1 million people have been displaced. This is a very important word to understand when you're reading about world events. When people are displaced, it means they have been forced to leave their homes. This isn't a choice, like moving to a new city for a better job. This means they had to flee, to run away, because of extreme danger, like a war or a natural disaster, just to find safety. That's the reality for over 1 million people in this region. The report also shows how this conflict touches people from all over the world. It tells the sad story of an Indian citizen who was killed by missile debris. Now, this word debris is related to shrapnel, but it's a little bit different. Debris just refers to all the scattered, broken pieces left over after something has been destroyed. You might hear about debris from a collapsed building after an earthquake, or debris on the highway after a car crash. In this story, it refers to the broken pieces of the missile that fell from the sky.
Okay, we have worked through some really complex stuff today, but in doing that, you have learned some incredibly powerful vocabulary. These are words that will help you understand so many more news stories in the future. So let's do a quick review to make sure these new words stick.
Here they are, the key words from today's story. Let's just say them together one more time. Defiantly, stockpiling, refinery, intercepted, shrapnel, displaced, and debris. You know, a really great way to remember these is to just try using one of them in a sentence sometime this week. It makes a huge difference. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. Sometimes a complicated news story can feel like a locked door. But as we saw today, sometimes all you need are a few keywords to unlock the meaning. Learning these words isn't about passing a test. It's about empowering yourself to better understand the